Hi, everybody. I just finished working my way through Swing Low by Walter Strickland, published by InterVarsity Press Academic. I want to say thank you to IVP for sending me these for review. This is a 2-volume work of history. It's a history and an anthology of Black Christianity in the United States. And I did work through both volumes, so I'm going to tell you what I thought. I'll go through my typical format of the main idea, the research behind the project, the readability of its style, and then my reactions in general at the end. But because this is 2 volumes, I'm going to kind of move back and forth between the 2 volumes as I talk through the review. I'll try to make it very clear which volume I'm specifically commenting on as I do this, but they are also, even though they're 2 volumes, they really are a unit, and I'm going to argue they should be read as a unit. But anyways, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let's jump into the main idea here. So the main idea, this is a historical project. So it is a presentation of a cohesive historical kind of look at the Black Christian church in America from the essentially the 1600s, like essentially the beginning of the antebellum period in which Africans were brought over through the dreaded, Middle Passage to be slaves in the United States, and the birth of the church in that context, all the way up through till modern day, really. So the first volume is the shorter volume. It's about 250 pages, and it is the single volume summary of the history, and it's broken into chapters that go mostly chronologically through that history. And then the second volume is the supplementary anthology material. So this is the collection of primary sources that are referred to. It's not all the things that are referred to in the first volume, but it is a lot of the materials that are referred to in the historical telling in the first volume. You can go over to the second volume and read edited selections from a ton of primary sources in each. It's essentially broken into like 6 periods roughly. So you can go through the antebellum period, then you can go through the Reconstruction period, then the Civil Rights era, and then that's where the chronology splits into 2, and he tells the story of Black evangelicalism, and then he also tells the story of Black theology, which is kind of more the liberation theology kind of strand. So it kind of breaks into 2 paths after the Civil Rights era. Anyways, but the anthology volume has sections that correspond to the chapters in the history volume, so you can see the primary sources and read selections from the primary sources that he's drawing upon in that historical telling in the first volume. So that's what Swing Low is all about. It's a big scope historical project. Although the first volume is relatively slim for the amount of time that's covered, and then the second volume is quite a bit longer with all those primary edited sources kind of put together that are organized. They're organized chronologically and thematically, so each section has, each chronological section has a section within it of sermons, a section of theological writings, a section of worship and liturgical writings, which is really interesting, a section of personal, like letters and correspondence and kind of biographical stuff. So, and each of those sections is in each of the historical sections of the anthology. So, yeah, so that's what Swing Low is in terms of what it's accomplishing. A couple, like his historical thesis, one other thing I want to say about it in terms of the actual content of the history that he's putting together here that I really liked is he is telling the story historically chronologically, but he also is using a bit of a theological lens on how to tell that history. And so Walter Strickland has identified 5, he calls them anchors with a capital A. He talks about these 5 theological themes that you can thread through the story of the Black church. And they are, the first one is big God. So this idea underpinning all of the theology, he argues, is this idea that God is big, that God is bigger than the world and God is bigger than our circumstances. The second anchor is Jesus, and notably the humanity and the suffering of Jesus. There's a lot of reflection upon that. The third anchor is conversion and life in the Spirit. So there's a very robust sense of personal transformation and conversion and ongoing growth and exercise of like walking in the Spirit. The fourth is the good book. So scriptures are prominent. And then the fifth one is liberation. So that deliverance, liberation theme that goes through the story of the Black church, notably drawing on, the story of the Exodus. And then of course, talking about the experience of slavery in the antebellum America. Those are the five anchors, and so he takes those anchors and he each kind of chapter in his telling, he draws out how those anchors show up through the story of the Black Church. So there you go. That's the main idea. The research behind this, I'm going to mostly focus on volume 2 in this for probably obvious reasons. That's where the research is really extremely prominent and is very clear. Although the first volume, he does cite a lot of secondary sources like biographies or other histories from a range of theological, from conservative to more, I don't like conservative liberal, but from more conservative evangelical fundamentalist historians to more progressive or liberation theology kind of historians. He draws on a wide range of historical secondary sources in that first volume too, so it's not only the primary sources that are cited in the research, but the research really shines in this project in that second volume, in the anthology. I mean, I already talked about what else in there. I'm not going to repeat my points too much there, other than to say it's so well organized and you can so easily find whatever you're interested in. I love that each historical section is bracketed out into those sub-themes of like I love that there's a worship and liturgy section that has lyrics of spirituals and hymns and choruses and even kind of liturgical service. There's a few sections of liturgies of different, like the African Methodist Episcopal Church liturgy, for example. I love that that's all in there. The sections are they are short. There are actually some that I wish they were longer, but the book's already pretty long and there's a ton of sources, and I get that you're trying to move through a wide range representative sources. So most of the sections are something in the range of 2 to 3 pages long. So they're pretty short, but each one also has, and I love this, each one also has a biographical snapshot of the person who wrote whatever the primary source is. So you get a little highlight of here's who this person was, here's the situation they were born into, here's a little bit of their career. That's at the beginning of every single primary source through that anthology volume, and there are a ton. So, I mean, it's just I think it's a remarkable project that he's been able to pull together here. I know he wasn't the only editor in that second volume, but he's the main kind of driver of this project, it seems. And I just think it's a really incredible resource. I love that, having read all of it, I love that I can keep both on my shelf, and then I can just pull that anthology volume down and I can jump into a primary source and get that biographical snapshot without having to find it in the first volume and refresh myself on maybe the name or the life circumstances of that person who wrote it. I just absolutely love that, and I love that second volume is such an important part of this project. I'll say more about that in my reaction in a minute. But really quickly on the readability here, this is very readable. It's super clear. It's not particularly stylistically interesting, I suppose, I don't take that for what it's worth. I don't think that's a big critique. It's just, this is a very straightforward, clear, simply written in the best way. Like, it's very accessibly written, in that first volume, especially that history. It's just very, very easy to understand, very easy to read. That first volume is a fantastic, not overly long, not overly complicated, but very clear and I think very balanced and wide-ranging telling of a very, very complicated story. I love some of the historical judgments he draws out in certain sections were super helpful, even for me as someone who's decently well-read in American religious history. There were things that he brought out about the Reconstruction era that I thought were really helpful and interesting, and he makes little judgments about, you can see some of the tensions that exist within evangelicalism today in this historical moment, so like when a lot of black people left, they could only basically participate in white-led churches up through kind of the Reconstruction period, and then when the invisible institution of the black church started to become less invisible, then they all started to leave those white churches and form their own churches. And so you can start to see, that's just one example of many, you can start to see the historical kind of antecedents for situations and tensions that exist in the American church today broadly through his telling of it. And I just love that it's so approachable and understandable. But I also love his telling of the tensions that grew between kind of black evangelicalism and then the more academic liberation theology after the civil rights movement. Those chapters might have been some of my favorite in the book. I really thought those were very insightful and very fair, and I love that he gave voice, or not he gave voice, but he allowed the voices of both kind of streams to exist in that telling and especially in the primary sources. So really, really, really helpful, really, really helpful stuff. Very, very readable. I would give this to basically anyone with an interest in history. I don't think that you have to have done a lot of reading before you can approach this project. And then finally, my reaction. So you've already gotten a decent sense, probably, my energy around this. Here's what I want to say about this. When I originally thought to review this, I was more interested personally, just in terms of my own reading, I was more interested in that first volume and the historical telling than I was in the second volume. Just because that's the kind of thing I like to read. I have mixed experiences with anthologies and collections of readings, primary source readings. I think they can be helpful, but sometimes they can be too arbitrary or too chopped up or not well organized. Or I have a mix of experiences with those. So I was more initially interested in the first volume than the second. But I have to say, the inclusion of that second volume kicks this over the edge for me. I loved this reading experience because of that second volume. And if you are someone who goes on to read this, if you pick this up, I really want to strongly encourage you to do what I did, which I'm just doing what he recommends doing, what Walter Strickland recommends doing. But as I read the introduction, he recommends going back and forth between the volumes as you work through it. So as you read one chapter, the footnotes at the bottom will say, see volume 2 for the selection that, that was written by this person. That's being kind of referenced in the historical narrative. And then you finish that chapter, and then you can flip over to the volume 2, find the corresponding materials, and read them. And so that's what I did, and that is an amazing reading experience. I think the first volume stands on its own as a solid, and I still would have liked it. I still would have liked that first volume as a very, trim, well-written, clearly presented single volume history. But that second volume, going back and reading those primary sources, even though they're just short selections, it enriches the reading experience so much, and it bolsters your understanding of the context. It gives you such a range of writings from centuries old to current day. You get, or at least I received, a very kind of contoured and nuanced sense of the different streams that these writers were pulling from, and the development of thought all the way from the existence of the antebellum period and in slavery through the failures of kind of post-Reconstruction and into civil rights. I mean, you get just this rich, layered, complicated, but also some of those clear themes and patterns do keep showing up as handles. And he also includes, in that second volume, relatedly, as you're reading, he includes little graphics, little icons that kind of remind you of those 5 anchors as you're reading these primary sources when the theme of big God shows up or the liberation theme. I just, I don't want to gush too much, but that, I went from being more interested in Volume 1 to being so grateful Volume 2 was there and feeling like that magnified the reading experience, and I learned so much, and I'm a person who loves history anyways, and this just magnified my love of why I love reading, American religious history in particular, and I honestly put down these 2 volumes with a greater, richer appreciation of the complexity of the story that he's telling, and also more of an understanding of some of the tensions that exist today between certain strands of evangelicalism, and also tensions that exist across racial and ethnic lines within the American church. This just contextualizes so much, and because it's presented so organized in such an organized way and so clearly written, and the combination makes it very easy to jump back and forth like I did. I just think this is an absolute home run of an historical project, and I'm so extremely grateful that he put it together and that IVP published it in this format that it's in. And I honestly cannot more highly recommend it. I mean, part of the reason it became on my radar is because InterVarsity Press was publicizing it for Black History Month, and I cannot think of a better volume or a better project to get and read if you want to read something specifically for Black History Month in February of 2025 as I record this. But even if it's not Black History Month and you're reading this or whatever, just I highly recommend reading this if you're interested in American religious history, and particularly if you're interested in the contours of the Black experience and Black theology and how liberation theology developed and the tensions that exist between more socially minded and more maybe, spiritually, otherworldly minded, aspects of theology within that expression of the church. Anyways, there's just so much here that is really worth worth spending some time with. So anyways, this is a pretty exuberant review for me, but I really loved this project. I love the reading experience of it, and I would absolutely highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in history or in the topic at hand. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts, my raving thoughts on this really wonderful 2-volume work by Walter Strickland at InterVarsity Press. As always, thanks for taking some time to watch.